science engagement in regional languages. Our speaker for this session, Dr. T.V Venkateswaran, is going to elaborate on the first and expansive linguistic SciComm project of the Government of India that has been commissioned to Vigyan Prasar. It's called Project Vigyan Bhasha. This project not only strengthens the ongoing initiatives of Vigyan Prasar for science communication in regional languages, but also encourages many entities across the country to engage in regional science communication initiatives, thereby allowing inclusive engagement of people from the non-English speaking strata. To let you in, for anyone who is not aware of Dr. TVV so far, let me introduce him again. He is a scientist with Vigyan Prasar, National Institute of Science Communication, Department of Science and Technology, New Delhi. He is a well-known science writer, TV host, science education and communications expert, and communication trainer. He is currently heading the Science Communication Training Division and this project, Vigyan Bhasha, by Vigyan Prasar. He is the founding chief editor of India Science Wire, an online science and technology news feature service published by the Department of Science and Technology. In association with Rajya Sabha TV, he conducts a widely watched television weekly show, Eureka, Conversation with an Indian Scientist, for the past 4 years now. He regularly writes on the latest developments in Indian and international science in English and Tamil. His research field spans part played by science communication in the fabrication of varied worldviews, in particular in the science Indian cultural cosmos and the circulation, reception, and domestication of sciences in pre-modern India, as well as R&D in the area of science education and communication knowledge products. Welcome, Dr. TVV. Thank you for agreeing to talk to us more about your promising initiative. The stage is all yours.
Yeah, thank you. So let me share my screen and then I'll start my presentation. And I thank all the organizers, particularly Sarah, Suchitra, and Shruti for this very wonderful opportunity, and also all the people who have joined this session. So let me start. So my title is Science Communication in 21st Century Indian Challenge. That is what I had chosen to speak. So my flow of talk is going to be like this. First, I'm going to kind of project that the agenda of science communication was part of the freedom movement, and what are the contemporary developments which necessitate some changes from the earlier agenda. So from this, distill what are the key challenges for 21st century, and then kind of elaborate or present a snapshot of two Vigyan Prasar initiative, that is India Science Fair and Vigyan Bhasha. I chose to speak about both the projects because I think it will be more relevant for people who have come to this huddle, right? So from that angle, I'll do this. And as I think I have about 30 minutes, somebody kind of red flag me around 25 minutes so that I won't overshoot the time. Would that be okay? Yeah. So let me carry on. So if you look at the India on the eve of its independence, that's about 75 years ago. Most of you are very young. Maybe you have read it only in your textbook. You have not experienced it. Perhaps none of you had even met people who have experienced this, right? So there was huge poverty, illiteracy, inequality, all of that as an outcome of colonialism when India was becoming free in 1947. The deprivation is, appalling. Even today, we are not completely okay. I mean, there are large sections of people who live in poverty and abject needs, but the situation was even more dire at the time of freedom. So if you look at the freedom movement had as part of its national ethos ideas like scientific temper, industrialization, non-alignment, secularism, and national unity. These were 5 ethos which kind of laced with the freedom movement, the ideologies of freedom movement, whatever be otherwise distinct streams within the national movement. You might be left of center or whatever. This five kind of played a common denominator for all sections within the national movement, and that's how when India became independent, these became the five important cornerstones national ethos. If you look at the time that India became independent, we were divided into numerous religions, regions, castes, subcastes, languages. So unification in the name of religion or race was not easy. Okay, it was not possible that you could unite all of them either in the name of religion or race. And people saw that science perhaps could provide that kind of a neutral space. Also, when in the aftermath of partition, when there was a huge sectarian violence, okay, and famines were the common phenomena just before colonialism and immediately after India's independence, science was seen as a solution to varied problems. How to unite people, a common ideology people thought can be built on based on science because science is common to everyone. And sectarian violence, poverty, many of these kind of problems can be addressed through science. That was what the idea of that time. So science was celebrated as a harbinger of material progress, particularly through the technology it engages. Famous Nehru statement that dams are temples of modern India, right? A narrative, a rhetoric, which symbolizes this sentiment. It was just Nehru, we should remember, that as I was pointing out, almost all leaders, all streams of national movement thought that expansion of public health through modern medicine, new crops, modern production techniques, these were seen as the way forward for a young nation that has just come out of the colonialism. If you look at radical reformers, they went one step further. They thought that science was a symbol and a potent tool for social and cultural change. Scientific temper, they argued, could fight social evils like caste domination, gender discrimination, exploitation, and so on. Bhagat Singh's writing elaborately talks about this strand of thought that was there during the Indian freedom. So that's how, in the immediate aftermath of India's freedom, rationality of science, secularism, and social justice were seen as three pillars on which the idea of Now Bharat, a new India, was imagined. If you look at the challenges for this emerging nation in those days, we had very low level of literacy, less than 20%. If you look at the rural areas, it was even less than 2%, 3% in many places. This implied that if you want to reach out to a large section of people, you will have to resort to informal education. We had a very high infant mortality rate and maternal mortality rate. The maternal mortality rate was something close to about 200. That is about 200 mothers out of 1,000 mothers died giving birth to child. Right? Infant mortality was even higher. So it was important that if India as a free country has to secure life and well-being of its citizen, health communication was an important aspect. Poverty, due to colonial exploitation, a country which was rich at one point of time was one of the poorest countries in the world by the end of 1947, when we got independent. Colonial exploitation, poverty was everywhere around. So which means economic upliftment was necessary. That means that that implied that we had to use technology to a great extent, build economic forces within the country. Along with that, you have to also imagine India. After all, when India became free, it was united. That's why if you look at the Constitution of India, it's called Union of India. Because at the time, roughly, there were about 500 native states, many provinces. So you have to unite all of them and make India into one. So what is the imagination? How do you make people imagine this country? Right? I mean, a common framework which will transcend language, religion, region. So all these were important challenges that's usually portrayed as national unity, the question of national unity. right? So these were important challenges that were around when India became free. So this implied a particular kind of SciComm agenda was set in during that time. That are three strands. One is popularization of science in mother tongue, so that this informal education would fill the gap, the absence of formal education. Okay, both in health area and otherwise general knowledge. Popularization of science in mother tongue was seen as a very important aspect. Then the self-reliant development, that was a key word that was talked about in those days, that technology were imported for which we are paying high price. Can we develop these technologies in India, somewhere reverse engineering? Can we look at appropriate technologies for India? Of course, there were different strands within this appropriate technology, let's say, framework, but still, alternate S&T policies were one of the important aspects, seen as important aspect of SciComm agenda. And third is nurturing scientific temper. Scientific temper here meant that a different worldview than the worldview which was received through ages of cultures. Okay, where you are looking at gender justice, you are looking at doing away with the caste discrimination. For all this, you wanted a scientific temper, right? So this three scientific temper was supposed to build in a modern worldview in India, right? So these were seen as a agenda. But then by 1960s, there was a big gap between promise and performance. We had environmental issues due to development which was lopsided, polluted rivers, polluted air, and whatnot. Around 60s and late 60s, these issues were emerging in the Indian consciousness. Gender impacts. Did the development equally provide opportunities for men and women, or did it discriminate women? This was one question that was asked around 1960s. Socio-economic impact. Yes, India is progressing, but is the progress equally divided? Is it disproportionately going to a small section? So these were all questions. Alternatives. We should look for alternatives. So the idea of science for people was added as one more agenda to the existing agendas around the 1960s and 70s. And the science for people agenda asked important questions like how science and technology is applied in our society, critical appreciation of science and technology, and also examine science and society issues. This is the background in which the 21st century India entered. So if you look at in the 1960s and 70s, there were huge national level movement looking at a rational use of medicine. That is irrational medicine, irrational combinations. They were all questioned. Biosafety. You had various movements like movements in Silent Valley in Kerala, where a forest was supposed to be cleared for building a dam for a power project. So questions like environment and pollution issues came up in a big way around 60s and 70s and caught the nation's imagination. But today, when we are entering into the 21st century, some new challenges are before us. One is there is a resurgence of faith-based worldviews. Some or other we believe that faith is equivalent to evidence-based rational argument. Okay, so in many areas we see that around us. So this is one important challenge, right? Secondly, because of this faith-based belief system, that's also affecting the worldview, right? I mean, what do we believe as existing around, both ontologically and epistemologically, right? So this is providing a biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenge to us in contemporary times. People talk about sciences like Western science, Eastern science, or sciences based on religion, Islamic science, Hindu science, Christian science, no, whatnot. So all this are one important area that is surrounding us. From scientific method, I mean, there is a huge section which argues for creationism, right? If you look at, evolution, creationism Not just in evolution. In fact, I mean, it's permeating in many other areas, but evolution, it's very readily seen. For example, the argument of creationism is based on more on faith and belief in certain text as inviolable, right? So this idea is coming up. Whereas, for example, this quote, which is from George Saturn, it says that I can reject Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, or Buddhism without making myself ridiculous. But I cannot deny the sphericity of earth without ridiculing myself out of the community of rational being, irrespective of the race, nationality, or religion. Very impactful quote. This is now challenged by this faith-based arguments, creationism, and so on. Right? This sentiment is now challenged. So there is a challenge to science as a method, science as a way of knowing things around us. That's one important challenge. Second, because of what we see as undesirable development around us, I mean, like pollution or challenges to global climate change, global warming, many such challenges that are around us, they are all seen as product of science rather than as product of our social production and reproduction. Because they are seen as product of science, of course, the technology needed for that is produced by science and technology, but its application, the way it is applied and restricted and regulated, are not in the realm of science and technology, but within the realm of society, right, and economics. But whereas, because it's seen as modern science, a narrative that science is destructive is gaining ground. We see it around, right? So this famous video from Africa, that science must fall, essentially argued that modern science is Western, and then there is allegedly some mysterious, mystified sciences in other places, Africa or East, or whatever fad that you have, you can add that superlative. There is this idea that is around us. No? Similarly, the corporates, be it in tobacco industry, or even today, for example, particularly in the Western world, with regard to climate change, there is manufacturing doubt. Is it really that tobaccos cause cancer? Or is it really that fossil fuel results in global climatic change crisis, right? This kind of manufactured doubt, with also deliberate fudging of science and data that we see around in big business when they use science, is also an important challenge that is around us, right? So public trust in science is waning. There is a challenge to public trust in science, and March for Science has become necessary. So if you look at the contemporary times, we have 5 key challenges before us. One is, of course, in India, still literacy rates are not substantially very high. We need to go miles. So the communicating science to lay public in their mother tongue is still an important challenge. Second, we need to also project that modern science as a cultural heritage of all cultures and not just European outcome, right? So that's also an important challenge before us. Then we need to act as an interface between organizations of mainstream S&T and the poor and the marginalized people, so that people do get the benefit of development in science and technology. And we need to also develop counter-hegemonic alternatives to programs and plans which come up with the tag that there is no alternatives. Then, of course, uphold rationalism, public reason, and radical reform. These are the emerging roles for science communication in modern times. So I'll take up a few minutes to elaborate on 2 important work of Vigyan Bhasha. One is, if you look at the media, there is a domination of West, particularly in science communication. Of course, it is true that epicenter of modern science is in the West, and the Western media agencies dominate. And so if you look at the S&T coverage in India, one, of course, there is very little science in media. And second, only 16% of research in Indian media are from Indian labs. I mean, of course, this is a few years ago data. With our input, we hope that we have made some change. That has to be examined, right? So So we commenced a program called India Science Wire. So India Science Wire is a syndicate service. It's to talk about the latest science and technology news from India. Okay, so it's a unique project in science journalism, focused on Indian Research Institute and universities. All stories are based on research papers published by Indian scientists in international and national journals and written by professional science journalists and science writers. Roughly about 500 news stories and features are released every year. That is roughly about 2 to 3 science stories every working day. So cover work of research institute, universities, R&D centers, okay, both in international and national journals. That's a product. So we cover events like conferences. We look at breaking news in science, some major discovery made by Indian scientists, or cover natural events, astronomical, weather events, rainbow, disaster, and so on, right? Basic research is not necessarily breaking news, but still it has a lot of potential to be in the news. Facilities, institution, okay. Sometimes very fascinating thing that people have done. For example, this is a paper which looks at chalk that is used for blackboard, okay. So one person has worked on it to create a new chalk which will not leave dust, right? So interesting story. So some fascinating, spectacular aspect. Also indigenous technology development, right? Science in the making, that it's not only that once the science is done and we know the answer, but when we are exploring, we can look at how science is working. So this is our India Science Wire, broadly speaking. So it's a syndicate news service, and we try to project science happening in India. That way, create a ambience in which people will feel that science is not just done only in Western labs. It's happening around us. Our next door neighbor is involved in it, right? So that's a impact we want to create out of this by showcasing science done in India, to project it as a common heritage of humankind, right? Now let me move to the second project, which is Project Vigyan Bhasha, or sometimes we also call it a science communication popularization extension in Indian language, scope Indian language, right? So if you look at the way the science is progressing, it's rapidly multiplying. So in this context, what we learned in school is, by the time we are out of it, perhaps is outdated. For example, I do remember, reading in my school textbook that moon is bone dry. But today, after finding water on moon, that statement is no longer valid in the same sense, right? So we need scope for learning outside the formal education system. Informal learning is key even today for various reasons, including this one. Okay, so if you want to be a literary, learning society, then we need informal spaces where one can learn. So if you look at Indian language, of course, Hindi is one of the key languages spoken by a large section of people. But then if you look at other languages, there are many other languages where the speakers are substantial, much more than, let's say, some of the European countries' speakers of language. There are more than 19,569 languages or dialects, according to Census of India 2021, of which 121 languages are spoken more than 10,000 people in India. Okay, so that's a huge number. But then we wanted to start with a manageable number. So we started with Urdu, Tamil, Kannada, Bangla, Kashmiri, Marathi, Telugu, Maithili, Malayalam, Odia, Assamese, Punjabi, Dogri, Nepali. Recently, Sanskrit is also added to this. All other languages will be added in coming months. Basically all our scheduled languages in the Schedule 8 of Indian Constitution will be added to this in coming few months. By end of this financial year, that is coming March 31st, we hope to reach that target. That's what is our idea. So what do we do? What we do is that we organize lectures, we produce a monthly magazine, we publish books, okay? And importantly, we conduct training programs. Training programs for whom? There are three kinds of training programs we conduct: training or orientation program, skill building, capacity building. We can use many of these kinds of words. One is for journalists who are already in the media. So you are there already in the media, you want to know what kind of science to cover, how to cover. we create a space for it. Second is science journalists. Journalists. I'm not science journalists. Journalists, people who are studying journalism and mass communication. That's another sector. Third is people who are in scientific institutions or in the institutions of higher learning. If you want to communicate science, if you are keen about it, how do you build your skills? Okay, so we provide this kind of three kind of training program, including in social media. Not just in print, including in social media. That's the. So if you look at languages, we have miles to go. If you really want to reach the last person in India, there are 10 non-scheduled languages that have more than 1 million native speakers. Remember that. These 10 languages are not part of the 8th schedule, but still they have 1 million speakers. There are 31 languages which have more than 1 lakh speakers, right? So it's a huge number. We need to address all this in coming years. Of course, we have miles to go. Vigyan Bhasha alone will not be able to do. That's why we are partnering with various agencies in the states where the languages are spoken, involve them in networking, create a platform through which we conduct this program. So this program is nurtured by Vigyan Bhasha, given, let's say, leadership by Vigyan Bhasha, but we don't become the leader. The leaders are people who are conducting it at the local level, the platform, a lot of people at the local level, right? So with this, I'll stop my talk, but by adding a commercial break. The commercial break is science communicators. Most of you are science communicators. There are 2 opportunities that are emerging in Vigyan Bhasha immediately. Keep watching our website, or maybe I have shared my email in the chat. Send me an email, so when that opportunities come, I can ensure that you get the information about it. Number 1, we are starting a weekly television show with the Sunset TV, which is going to which will be a magazine format program. So we need science writers who can write television script. Okay, so you are interested, you want to check out whether dabble on this, please welcome. Second is India Science Wire. India Science Wire, you write to the editor of India Science Wire that this is a story that I would like to cover. So if nobody else has already taken it up, if they give a clearance, you write up and then you can send it. So freelance is possible. So these are 2 possibilities that are before us. Of course, there is a third possibility, both in the Sunset TV project and the India Science Fair. Some vacancies are arising for science communicators. That will be advertised soon, within a week. Those vacancies would come. Please apply if you are interested and if you want to join us in this effort.
Awesome. Thank you so much, TVV, for giving that a wonderful close, because it's not just about knowing the wonderful initiatives that are happening now, but also to understand how each one can be involved. Because I think you also agree that there's a lot of disconnect in the small community that we already still have as science communicators. So it's very important to know how we can come together as a community, right? So I'm really glad for you that you've mentioned this.